The magical, mystical,
And wonderful.
yes, and wonderful Adventures of Gordon. Episode 1. Nannans Quilt. Now, no story can begin without a small introduction of our main character, Gordon, or Gordy, as I like to call him. Yes, I know Gordon, and have done since he was a boy of 1 year old. He's 21 now, but in this series we wind back time to when he was a typical, or maybe not so typical, pre-teen 12-year-old lad. He had blonde hair and lagoon blue eyes. Gordon wasn't your typical young lad. He was somewhat special in the way that he had a very colourful life, as you'll find out. Our tale begins here in Yorkshire, England. Imagine a house on the top of a steep hill surrounded by fields, farmlands, and forests. This is where Gordon lives. It was pretty isolated, and for good reason, because odd things would happen when Gordon was around, as you'll see. On this cold, fresh and crisp English morning, Gordon was doing his favourite thing in the whole wide world. Sleeping, of course. Oh, and how Gordon loved his sleep. He preferred his slumber to go on until at least lunchtime, and he would stretch to 1 o'clock if he could, but his militaristic mother Mildred would always wake him up. She was like a snooze button that wouldn't switch off. Well, this one particular morning, Gordon was slumbering in his bed, expecting to sleep in up to 1 o'clock, as he said to himself he deserved it because it was a Saturday. But Mildred had other plans. So, as per usual, in her loving and gentle voice, she tapped on his bedroom door and said,
Gordon, get up and get dressed now.
To which Gordon replied,
Yes, Mum.
Mildred marched off into her room as Gordon turned over and snuggled back into his cave quilt. A booming voice from the corridor echoed throughout the whole house.
Gordon, I can't hear any movement in there. You better be getting dressed.
Gordon groaned and threw back the quilt and stamped his feet on the floor, to which he heard his mother say,
Thank you, at last.
Little did Mildred know that this was merely a decoy so he could get back into bed and have 5 more minutes, like the snooze on your clock. 15 minutes passed and Gordon had drifted back into the land of Nod, warm, comfortable, and hoping he could stay there for at least 2 more hours. Mildred had experienced this scenario many times before, and so she shouted Gordon's little sister, Polly. Polly was a frantic 5-year-old with a mission to bug her brother as much as she possibly could, and she knew her mum Mildred wanted her to wake Gordon up. Polly scrambled out of her bedroom and ran as fast as she could along the corridor towards Gordon's room. Meanwhile, Gordon, in his dream, could hear the sound of a rhythmic drum. In reality, this was Polly's feet on the wooden floor booming down the corridor towards his room. Polly crashed Gordon's door open and jumped on his bed. Gordon had experienced this before and had hoped that Polly would have learned from last time. Gordon rose from the quilt like a phoenix from the ashes, and after perfecting a punch from his hero, Bruce Lee, Gordon punched Holly and she collapsed to the floor and began to wail. Gordon had hoped she had been conditioned not to jump on him while sleeping, and from the last time he punched her, last weekend. But no, the girl was too persistent and loved to plague his life out. He knew what would happen next. Polly sprang up with tears in her eyes and smiled at Gordon. They sprinted down the corridor towards their mother Mildred's room. Gordon slipped and it gave Polly a slight lead as they neared their mother's door. Polly smashed their mother's door open and began crying and wailing whilst Gordon tried to defend himself over the racket.
Quiet! We are going to visit Nannan and Grandads, so get dressed, teeth and breakfast. I want to see you both downstairs and ready to go in 1 hour. No ifs, ands or buts. Chop, chop. Get a move on,
said Mildred. They both went silent.
Both of you get dressed and get your breakfast.
They looked at each other, and just as they were about to break into another argument, their mother said,
Now.
Taking the hint, they turned on their heels and exited the room. As they closed the door, they both sprinted back to their bedrooms and began getting dressed. Gordon thought he had pushed his luck to the limits, so he decided he would get dressed and go and get some breakfast. He went downstairs and opened all the cupboards, looking for his favorite cereal.
Ah,
he exclaimed as he discovered the last box. He quickly shot over to the fridge to get the milk and drenched the cereal. There was only a bit left in the bottom, and Gordon knew Polly loved this cereal too, so he poured all of it into a large bowl and started to eat like a madman. He devoured the cereal, chewing on it frantically. He looked like a duck, bobbing his head back and forth, expecting the cereal to wiggle down his neck as fast as possible. He thought that would teach Polly a lesson for waking him up. One of these days she would learn to leave him alone. Gordon was down to the last bit in the bowl when he noticed Cookie in the corner. Not an actual Cookie, but their little Jackson dog, who would happily sit in the corner of the room staring into space. Her little eyes would look in different directions independently. Gordon thought this was because she could see into different dimensions. Gordon was reaching the last bit of cereal, and his belly was so full that he decided he would drink the milk and give Cookie the rest of the cereal. Just as Gordon's mouth opened to shout Cookie, the little dog scurried over, sat in front of him, and gave him a paw. He thought Cookie was a mind reader too. He placed the bowl down on the floor, and Cookie tucked into the remaining cereal. Polly entered the kitchen and began in her search for cereal, but Gordon had polished it off with the help of Cookie, of course. Polly looked at the bowl on the floor, and her face changed to pure rage as she turned to Gordon. He looked at her and simply replied, Polly was enraged and rushed over to Gordon when their mother Mildred entered the room. Polly didn't notice Mildred, but Gordon knew his timing was immaculate, and just as Polly began trying to smack Gordon around the head, Mildred grabbed her arm just as it was about to swipe across Gordon's face. Gordon held back a smile and a laugh because he knew Polly had walked into his trap, which was a nice payback, along with the cereal, for waking him up. Mildred told Polly off, and she sulked and sat on a stool in the corner of the kitchen next to Cookie, who stared into space or another dimension. Maybe she could see ghosts, who knows? Mildred did Polly some toast and said,
Come on, you two, and Cookie. We're off to see Nannan and Grandad. Oh, and Bert.
Bert was Nannan and Grandad's dog, just to let you know. The journey to Nannan's began as Gordon, Polly, Cookie, and Mildred squeezed into Mildred's classical mini-car. Mildred fired up the engine and pushed her foot down on the gas pedal, and the little car shot down the country lane. The old suspension bounced everyone up and down, but yet Cookie sat still, watching the other dimension, cool, calm, and collected. As the little Minnie reached Nannan and Grandad's house, they could hear Bert barking as usual. That dog barked at anything and everything. He would bark if a mouse farted across the street. But anyway, Mildred pulled into Nannan and Grandad's driveway and harshly pressed the brake, and if not for the seat belts, everyone would have probably gone flying out of their seats. They knocked on the door and waited and waited and waited and did some more waiting. Nannan or Grandad usually answered the door straight away, but today they couldn't hear or see them through the windows. Mildred pulled out a mass of keys from her handbag, and after fumbling through multiple keys, she found the key to Nannan and Grandad's front door and unlocked it. They were met by Bert, who finally stopped barking once Cookie came into the house and told him off by giving him a weird glare. After all the commotion, Mildred shouted,
Mum? Dad?
Gordon and Polly shouted,
Nannan, Grandad.
All three went silent in anticipation of the usual reply, but there was nothing. So the search party dispersed and began looking for Nannan and Grandad. Oh, by the way, Nannan's name was Brenda and Grandad's name was Dick. Thought you'd like to know. Polly took the downstairs, Gordon the first floor, and Mildred got stuck with the tower. Well, they called it the tower when it was really the attic. Danny lived up there, who was another grandchild. Their search efforts were coming up with nothing. Gordon even checked all the wardrobes, as Nannan could have easily been hiding somewhere in there, as she was only a very small but springy old lady. Nannan and Grandad were nowhere to be seen, which was weird, especially for a Saturday. They would usually be sat in the kitchen debating some topic or another. Polly went through the drawers in the living room to check for Grandad's car keys to make sure they hadn't taken the car. She found the keys and gave a big sigh, as that could have been the telltale sign that they were in the car. Polly spun round and was about to shout her mum when she noticed Cookie sat on the couch staring at Nannan's seat on the sofa where she would usually sit. All she could see was a quilt that Nannan and Grandad had bought back from when they were in Egypt on holiday. A puzzling expression came over Polly's face as she started off into the kitchen. Just as she was about to pass through the door, Cookie made a weird noise. Polly turned around and looked at Cookie, who was staring at the quilt. Meanwhile, upstairs, Gordon was getting bored of searching, so he headed back downstairs to the room where he was sure he would meet up with Polly, but she was nowhere to be seen. All he found was Cookie, staring at Nannan's Egyptian quilt. Gordon dismissed Cookie and headed for the super-secret hidden chocolate drawer, which he found one afternoon while searching his Nannan and Grandad's room. He retrieved a big chocolate bar and reorganized the chocolate drawer to try and make sure it wasn't that obvious that he had taken a secret and hidden sacred bar of chocolate. Just as Gordon was about to devour the delicious chocolate, he heard a strange noise. This made Gordon jump, as he thought it was Polly, so he shot around, shoving the chocolate into his back pocket. Polly was nowhere to be seen at all. He just discovered Cookie staring at the quilt. He gave out a sigh, and pulled the chocolate bar from his pocket and walked over to the quilt. As he approached the quilt, he heard his mum coming down the stairs and began to panic. He needed to hide the chocolate evidence and so decided to quickly throw it under the quilt. What Gordon didn't expect was what happened next. As Mildred stood in the doorway of the room, something amazing happened. Gordon flew into the air as Mildred was frozen in time in the doorway with her eyes at half a blink and her lips open as she was about to speak. At that very moment, the quilt wrapped itself around Gordon and he vanished, falling through the air. His body was spinning out of control. He spiraled uncontrollably as he neared the ground. He yelled, "Ah!" Gordon had materialized into another world. Or, he thought, possibly another dimension. That's why Cookie might have been looking at the quilt. Then, just before he hit the ground, he stopped, and he noticed a familiar face spinning and spinning into focus. Polly's face was spinning into Gordon's vision. He hadn't had nightmares as scary as this. Just as the world stopped spinning, Gordon dropped to the ground with a great thud. Gordon was extremely disorientated, but managed, with the help of Polly, to scramble to his feet. Turning to Polly, he said,
Oh, my stomach. What just happened?
Polly laughed and replied,
I've been here for days waiting for you, Mum, to appear. Come on. I've got to take you, come on.
Where are we going?
You'll see, come on.
Polly grabbed Gordon's arm and began to run towards what looked like a marketplace. As they neared the market, Polly wanted Gordon to be very, very careful. He pulled a puzzled face and stopped in his tracks.
Polly, tell me what's going on.
They both stood for a few seconds, and Polly waved for Gordon to hide and be quiet in some bushes.
Spill the beans. Where are we?
Gordon said.
I don't know. All I know is I touched Nannans Quilt because of Cookie. Then I arrived here and I met this weird-looking girl called Ella. She took me to a fish and chip shop that her family own and she said she knew where Nannan and Grandad are. She said I could stay there until they came for me, but they never came.
This makes no sense to me.
It's Nannans Quilt.
What about it?
It's magic and likes to suck people into this world. Whatever, or whoever it likes. Well, as long as they touch the quilt, of course. I know it's a bit crazy. Come on, I'll take you to see Ella at her fish and chip shop. We can talk to them and have some dinner too.
They both moved quickly, and after a few minutes on the beach inside the magical quilt, a fish and chip shop came into view. There were other shops nearby, but the fish and chip shop was a standalone shop and was separate from the other buildings. Polly waved for Gordon to go to the back entrance, and they both entered the shop. The minute they entered, they were greeted by a huge bull-mastiff dog with strings of drool dripping from his floppy chops. The dog was nearly as tall as Gordon and approached him slowly. Gordon began to panic and thought this was the end as Polly stood, smiling as she knew full well what was about to happen. The huge bull-mastiff jumped up at Gordon and knocked him flat on his back, pinning Gordon to the ground with some rather huge paws. As Gordon squirmed and tried to get free, the bull-mastiff's large head lowered slowly towards Gordon's face. In his mind, Gordon thought,
That's it. I'm doomed. I'm done for. This is it, the end.
As the head neared his face, the bull-mastiff thrust his slimy chops into Gordon's face and began licking and drooling all over him. Polly simply laughed. He wasn't used to this as Cookie, their dog, was tiny and didn't drool or give out huge slobbery kisses. She just gave little butterfly kisses. Anyway, the drool went everywhere, and Gordon did a mixture of laughing, coughing, and gasping for breath. After 5 minutes of drooly kisses, Polly said,
Chips, heel.
The minute the bull-mastiff heard the word heel, he got off Gordon and went to the corner of the room and laid in his basket. Gordon began wiping himself down and stood up.
Ugh. Look at this. Why didn't you call him off sooner?
Chips is not an angry dog. He's a very sweet boy.
Gordon jumped and spun around to see a brown-haired, green-eyed girl.
Hello there, Gordon. My name is Ella. I can see that you've met Chips, our bull-mastiff.
Gordon mumbled and then managed to say,
Hello.
I suspect you're hungry, Come on, let's get you some food and I'll fill you in about the whereabouts of your Nannan and Grandad.
Ella turned sharply and exited the room. Polly smiled at Gordon and said,
Come on, you diddly-dip.
Gordon was still a little shook up from his slobbery kisses, but Polly's voice grated on his brain and made him stand to attention. as he followed her through a massive, big, old-style wooden door and up a set of stone-slab steps into a small but cosy living room. Ella was stood by the old stone fireplace, placing logs of wood onto the fire. Gordon and Polly walked over to a big fabric couch and sat down, nearly sinking into their seats. As Ella piled the logs into the fireplace high, Gordon and Polly felt quite chilly, and they noticed the window looked frosted up with ice. Then they heard someone or something running up the stone steps. The reason I say something is because it sounded like claws tapping on the stone stairs. Their heads firmly fixated on the only entry door to the room, waiting in nervous anticipation of what or whom was about to enter the room. Their hearts beat faster and faster as they noticed the noise became louder, as the claws or feet or something scurried up the stairs. Then, with immense momentum, Chips the bull-mastiff dog leaped from the door and jumped into Gordon and Polly's laps, and even further squished them into the couch.
"Huh, I think he likes you,"
Ella exclaimed.
"He knew you were cold, so wanted to warm you up while I start the fire."
Both Gordon and Polly turned their heads to face each other, and Polly said,
I'll never get used to him doing this. He seems so scary, but he's so soft and warm.
Gordon nodded in agreement and said,
I must admit, he's making me nice and warm.
They both turned their gaze to Ella, who was now searching for something on an old bookcase. She fumbled around on the top of the shelf and located a small wooden chest. Taking the chest from the shelf, she opened it, and inside there was a sizable red diamond.
"It is frustrating that these diamonds like to move themselves around the room all the time."
She took the red stone from the chest and walked over to the fire. Rubbing the stone and pointing it at the logs in the fireplace, she uttered the word,
"Infernus!"
At first, nothing happened, so they waited, and then, all of a sudden, the logs were engulfed with bright orange flames that warmed the entire room and lit up all their faces with a comforting orange glow. Ella returned the diamond into the box and placed it on the table, and after a few seconds, it vanished.
"Until the next time,"
Ella said. Gordon felt marveled, perplexed, suspicious, warm, and a little bit hungry. After a few moments of being dazed at the events that had just transpired, Gordon pushed the huge folds of Chips's skin forward, took a deep breath, and fixated his gaze on Ella.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Basically, we've been transported to a different dimension where magic exists as well as a larger-than-life monstrous dog, and he roams free, and we're trapped to spend the rest of our lives as prisoners to...
He paused for a moment, and before he began ranting again, Ella raised a finger to her lips, and it was as though Gordon couldn't speak no matter how hard he tried. In the corner of his eye, Polly sat comfortable with a big smile on her face as she snuggled down into Chips's fur as though waiting for a bedtime story. Ella pointed at the chair at the other side of the room, and to Gordon's amazement it began to vibrate, then shot across to Ella, and with precision timing she began squatting down to sit on the chair, which then met her backside. So she crossed her legs and got comfortable. Pulling an old pipe out of a small pouch attached to her belt, she began stuffing what seemed like moss into the chamber. She then produced a match from the pouch and lit the pipe. Gordon readied himself for the classical tobacco smoke smell that he was so familiar with. Oh, and no, Gordon doesn't smoke, but his Nannan and Grandad do. Just wanted to clear that up before you began jumping to conclusions that Gordon smoked. Anyway, back on with the story. But the smell wasn't that of tobacco. It was a fruity fragrance that filled the air. This is so strange a place, Gordon thought. After Ella was comfortable, she drew in a large breath and exhaled out a large cloud of fruity smoke and began to speak.
I smoke this pipe to tell you the tale of my world.
As she spoke, the smoke began to form shapes that got clearer and clearer as she went on.
This is the land of King Schwebbie.
As she continued, the smoke cloud turned into a man's face. He was bold with glasses and had a golden crown on his head, and a white furry creature sat on his lap. Gordon thought he looked like a classic 007 villain. 007, another favourite character of Gordy's. Just thought I'd tell you.
King Schwebbie has enslaved most of the island and doesn't take kindly to anyone. He wants to take over the magical part of the island, but doesn't know how and doesn't have the power to cross the Great Barrier. I put it there. Or should I say, my ancestors did. I just look after it. The people who live on his side of the barrier are controlled and can't break free. He gives them just enough to survive, but not enough to be happy or live a healthy life. All they are basically useless eaters to him, and he just gives them bugs and small creatures and makes them live in small buildings while he lives in a grand castle. Now, I was too late to stop your Nannan and Grandad from crossing the magical barrier that separated us from the king's kingdom, and unfortunately one of my scouting birds saw them get captured and taken to the castle. They will be put in a prison cell until they are exhausted and then questioned for any new knowledge and finally turned into a Schwebbie subject and given a small house.
Gordon's eyes welled up with tears, and he couldn't understand how someone could be so cruel and why. Ella continued.
I can see that you're perplexed, and so am I, as I don't understand why we can't just coexist with each other.
Gordon, through tears, began to speak.
Why does it keep all the people like this? Why not just get rid of them?
Ella went on.
Well, he needs to keep them as an insurance policy, to make sure he has an army to protect him in case anyone tries to destroy his kingdom.
Gordon cleared his throat, and with a serious stare, he asked Ella,
Where do I go to get my Nannan and Grandad back, and can you help me?
I'm unable to cross the magical barrier, just like King Schwebbie is unable to cross onto my side, but I can give you a few magical items to help you along the way. But I feel this will be too dangerous for a little boy to do alone. Many have ventured into the king's land and never returned.
I'm not just anyone,
Gordon said with a tone of fury.
Nobody imprisons my grandparents and tortures them.
The tense air was broken as Polly began to snore loudly.
She must be tired. She is a good kid, and she's helped me with chips all day.
Ella smiled at Polly and took another inhale from the pipe. Gordon squirmed and just managed to free himself from the great hulking weight of chips. He left Polly to sleep and with a great sigh headed for the door. Ella followed him, and they both descended the stone steps into the basement where Chips usually stayed.
I'm going to say nothing to stop you, as I know how important family is to me and to you, and rest assured that Polly will be safe with me. I'll look after her till you get back. If you get back.
Thank you.
Gordon headed for the door, and just as he was about to go outside, Ella stopped him.
Wait.
Gordon turned around and saw Ella holding a small pouch with an outstretched arm and gave it to Gordon.
Here. You'll be needing this.
What is it?
It's my expanso pouch. You can carry large items inside it, and I filled it with a few things that might help you along the way. Inside you'll find matches, sweet bread in case you get hungry, an expanding tent with magical heat to keep you warm, a strong rope, 3 gold coins and a map. It's a magical map, and it will show you where to go and which way to go. and I've marked a tavern along the way to the castle. I have a magical friend who owns it. He's a good man and helps the people of the city as much as he can. He's called Bert, and he'll help you if you mention my name to him."
"Ah, so it's like a sat-nav,"
Gordon said.
"A what?"
Never mind. Thank you so much for all of your help, and I better be leaving now. I'll come back for Polly when I get Nannan and Grandad, if that's all right."
Gordon opened the door and Ella wished him good luck.
"I hope to see you again soon."
This gave Gordon a feeling of anxiety in his stomach, and he replied,
"Don't worry, you will."
With that, he headed out of the door while fumbling in the pouch for the sweet bread as he was starving. He found the bread and remembered he also had the chocolate he snuck out of the treat box at Nannan and Grandad's house, so he broke off a couple of squares and sandwiched them in between the sweet bread. One slice made him stuffed, and so he put the rest and the bar of chocolate inside the pouch and stuffed the pouch into his back pocket and began walking. Night had fallen quickly as Gordon rummaged around in the pouch for the map. He looked and decided to set up camp near a location labeled Harmony Waterfall. He thought it would be a good place to rest for the night. He pulled the fabric tent out of the pouch and was puzzled as to how he was going to put it up. In frustration, he dropped it to the ground, and as it left his hand and was nearly on the ground, it sprang up and formed a small tent. Gordon thought,
"Wow, I could get used to this magic stuff."
but the tent was so small. The tent was barely up to Gordon's waist and didn't look like it would even fit Polly inside.
"Oh, well,"
he said as he opened the tent door and crawled in. The second he entered, he couldn't believe his eyes when he got inside the tent. It was huge, just like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, he thought. It had a double bed, a small kitchen, and a toilet, too. Simply amazing, but Gordon was knackered, and it's time for bed, he thought. Gordon crawled into the bed and after such a hectic day fell straight to sleep. The morning drew closer as Gordon stirred, waiting for the all-too-familiar sound of Mildred's voice to wake him up. But it never did. Gordon opened his eyes expecting to have been in a dream, but alas, the adventure he was on was real. Very real. For the first time in his life, he chose to get up on his own and get ready for the journey to rescue his Nannan and Grandad. He walked to the small kitchen, opened the cupboard, and found a box of some sort of cereal. It said on the box, Imaginos. He didn't care, he just needed some food. After taking the first bite, he tasted his favorite flavors. It gave him a temporary boost in mood, and he finished his breakfast with a classical Then he headed outside of the tent and started gathering up the tent and stuffing it inside of the magical pouch. He plucked out the map and looked at his current location and where he needed to go, which was the castle. The little pointy arrow glowed on his current location and moved as he walked. So he headed in the direction of the castle. Walking at a fast pace, he reached a bridge, and there was a weird-looking barrier across the bridge. Looking at the map, he realized that this was the magical barrier that Ella had mentioned, and he walked over the bridge and through the weird, fuzzy force field. As he passed through, though, the world changed, and it seemed a little dimmer. He shrugged his shoulders and carried on. Now time for a little break. If you would like to know more about the magical and mystical
And wonderful.
adventures of Gordon, please like, share, enjoy, and comment if you would like to know the rest of the story. Will Gordon rescue his grandmother and grandfather, a.k.a. Nannan and Grandad? What will happen with King Schwebbie? Who knows? But if you enjoyed the story, please keep following and comment to tell me that you would like more. Thank you. Have a fantastic day, you beautiful people.